The black and white checkered floor, the hum of dying neon lights flickering in their last gasps of electricity, the stale smell of coffee and grease hanging heavy in the air like a curse that could not be erased, and three dangerous men in suits that cost more than everything she owned went absolutely still. Aria Winters had walked through that diner door at 3:56 in the morning looking like something the November rain had spat back out. 27 years old but moving like a woman twice that age, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the linoleum with each step, her apron soaked through with coffee and something darker she did not want to identify. Rain dripped from her hair, plastered in dark strings against her pale face. Her hands shook as she collapsed into the corner booth, the same booth she always chose because Robert Hargrove could not see her from the kitchen, and she began counting her tips with the precision of a woman counting survival. $17. That was all the customers had left her during her 14-hour shift. $17 to add to the $17 already in her wallet. $34 total. She had exactly 3 seconds of relief before the mathematics of her life returned to crush that feeling. Rent was due in 14 days. 14 days to find $650 she did not have. The final notice letter sat in her coat pocket, each word stamped across the envelope like a death sentence. Final notice. The words had stopped seeming real somewhere around the third time she read them. But it was the small sound from the back booth that made everything stop. A child's gasp. Soft. Shocked. The kind of sound a 6-year-old makes when he suddenly recognizes something his mind thought was lost forever. Matteo Calabrese felt the moment his body went rigid before his mind caught up to why. His dark eyes, the color of a storm gathering before it broke, fixed on the trembling woman in the corner booth. The scar along his jawline tightened as his jaw clenched. Beside him, in the crimson leather of the booth that cost $4,000, sat Micah. His son. The boy he had pulled from the edge of the abyss when his mother died in that hospital bed 3 years ago, the child he protected with the same absolute ferocity he used to protect his empire. Micah was staring at the waitress with tears streaming down his small face. "That is her," the boy whispered. His voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "That is the lady who saved me." Vinnie's hand stopped mid-reach for his coffee cup. The cup hung in the air for a full 3 seconds. In 15 years of working for Matteo Calabrese, he had learned to read the smallest shifts in his boss's energy the way a sailor reads the ocean before a storm. And right now, the storm was gathering. Theo leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing, following Matteo's gaze to the woman counting crumpled bills with hands that could barely hold still. "Boss," Theo said, his voice careful, measured. "What is happening?" Matteo did not answer. He could not answer. Because 3 months ago, when he had pulled his son from the burning hotel suite at the Ashford Crown, when the fire had filled his lungs and rage had filled his heart as he watched his security team burst through the smoke, there had been a moment when he thought Micah was gone. The flames had taken his wife. He had been prepared to let them take his son too, because a man can only survive so much loss before he becomes a shell pretending to be human. But then she had stumbled through the smoke carrying Micah in her arms. A woman in a stained uniform with burns on her hands and her hair singed. She had not known who she was handing to him. She did not know that the man she placed the boy into was a man who could destroy cities with a phone call. She had simply seen a child and chosen to save him. Then she had turned and disappeared back into the flames before his men could stop her. The hotel manager had reported that an electrical fault caused the fire. The fire department had found no body in the suite where the woman had last been seen. They had concluded that the flames had moved too fast, that she had not made it. Matteo had sent his people to every hospital, every clinic, every place where an injured waitress might surface. They had found nothing. It was as if she had been a ghost, a phantom who appeared only long enough to save his son, then evaporated into smoke. For 3 months, Matteo had carried a debt he could not pay. A man like him did not forgive unpaid debts. His entire empire was built on a code that demanded repayment. Every favor owed was a knife held against your own chest. Every promise left unfulfilled was a weakness that would eventually be exploited. But the woman had disappeared, and Matteo had been forced to carry that unpaid debt like a stone in his chest. Until now. That is impossible, Vinnie said, his voice low. The fire was 3 months ago. The woman is dead. We confirmed it. We confirmed nothing, Theo said quietly. He was watching his boss's face, watching the way Matteo's breathing had changed, watching the way his entire body had gone absolutely still. We assumed it. Aria did not notice the men watching her. She was too focused on the arithmetic of survival, too consumed by the weight of that final notice letter pressing against her ribs like a blade wrapped in ice. 14 days. $650. No plans, no solutions, no options. Just the slow mathematics of impossible choices. She had worked for Robert Hargrove for 8 years. 8 years of 14-hour shifts at the Ashford Crown Hotel, watching him pocket her tips, watching him schedule her for the shifts no one else wanted, the graveyard slots, the double backs, the holidays when other employees got to see their families. 8 years of his hands on her shoulder that lasted too long, his comments about her body that she had learned to smile through because the alternative was homelessness. 8 years of bruises she hid under long sleeves and scars she mapped across her back like a topography of survival. The final notice in her pocket was from a debt collector hunting a $650 balance on her mother's medical bills. Her mother had been gone for 18 months. Her father had left when Aria was 9. She had grown up believing that love was something other people had, something for people who had more than $34 to their name. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered. Once. Twice. The sound of the electricity dying, a soft crackling like something breaking from the inside out. When Aria looked up, the 4 men in the back booth were watching her. One of them was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of presence that made the air itself seem to compress around him. His dark suit was tailored to cost more than her annual rent. His white shirt was unbuttoned slightly at the collar, revealing the kind of confidence that came from a man who had never in his life been afraid of anything. His eyes met hers. Aria's breath stopped. She could not explain why. She could not explain the sudden feeling that the floor had shifted beneath her, that everything she understood about the rules of her own small world had just been rewritten. His gaze held her for a full 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds. But in those 5 seconds, something passed between them, a recognition, a weight, a question hanging in the space between 2 people who had already met without knowing the other's name. Then the child beside him tugged on his sleeve. "That is her," Micah whispered again, louder this time. "The lady who saved me from the fire. She carried me through the smoke. She did not know who you were. She just saved me." The silence that followed was so complete it had weight. Matteo's jaw tightened. His hand came up slowly and rested on his son's small shoulder. He did not break eye contact with Aria. "Come," he said to Vinnie and Theo. The word was simple. Absolute. Like a god issuing a commandment. The 2 men exchanged a look neither fully understood. They slid out of the booth and walked toward the counter, where the night manager was pretending he had not witnessed any of this, pretending he did not recognize Matteo Calabrese, pretending that powerful men in expensive suits visited his diner at 3:24 in the morning all the time. Matteo remained. He remained in the booth with Micah, watching the woman in the corner, watching the way her hands had stopped counting tips, watching the way her entire body had gone rigid with a fear she was trying very hard to conceal. She did not recognize him. She did not understand that the man holding his son's shoulder had spent 3 months with a debt burning in his chest. She did not know that every single day of those 3 months, he had woken up thinking about the woman who had walked into fire and carried out his son. She did not know that he had become dangerous in new ways, aggressive in his business dealings, pushing his empire harder and darker because he needed something to fill the space where gratitude and obligation should have lived. She did not know that seeing her was like watching the missing piece of something finally slide back into place. Aria felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She forced herself to keep breathing. In. Out. In. Out. The way her mother had taught her years ago, on nights when Robert Hargrove was shouting in the back rooms, when she was young enough to be afraid of things she could not control. She gathered her $34 with shaking hands and stood. The bell above the diner door chimed as she walked toward it, the sound thin and desperate in the pre-dawn darkness. The November wind outside would tear through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Her car was broken down somewhere on the highway. She had no money to fix it. She would have to walk the 6 miles back to her apartment, arriving soaked through and freezing, with only hours before her next shift began. She did not see Matteo stand up. She did not see him whisper something to his son that made the boy nod solemnly. She did not see Vinnie and Theo turn, their hands moving in subtle patterns that signaled something was about to change. All she saw was the door, and beyond it, another impossible night. But what she did not see, what she could not possibly have known, was that a man who had been searching for her for 3 months had just found her at last. And that man, Matteo Calabrese, had only one law that governed his entire existence: he always paid his debts. The question was not whether he would help her. The question was how far he would be willing to go. 2 weeks earlier, November rain fell like a curse on Chicago, each drop hammering the streets with the weight of something that could not be stopped, could not be escaped, could not be forgiven. In a studio apartment on the south side, where the walls wept with moisture and the radiator clanked like a dying animal, Aria Winters woke to the sound of her alarm clock shrieking at 5:51 in the morning. Her body ached the way bodies ache when they have forgotten what rest feels like. 8 years of sleeping for hours a night, working 2 jobs, skipping meals so that the lights would stay on. 8 years of making herself smaller, quieter, less real. She pushed herself up on her elbows. The mattress was thin enough to feel the box spring beneath it. Her back screamed. Along the pale line of her spine ran a map of scars, old ones and older ones, a topography of every time Robert Hargrove had decided that her silence was not complete enough. She never looked at these scars. Some mornings she forgot they were there. Most mornings she did not. On the nightstand sat a white envelope. The words printed across the front in red capital letters seemed to pulse in the pre-dawn darkness. Final notice. Eviction proceedings. $65,000 owed in 14 days or legal action will be taken. The hospital bills. The medical debt her mother had left behind. The compound interest that grew like a tumor with no treatment, no cure, no merciful ending. $65,000. In 2 weeks. Aria reached for her wallet on the dresser. Inside sat $34 in wrinkled bills and 1 dime. That was everything. $34 and a dime between her and homelessness. She held the wallet with both hands, as though it might disintegrate if she breathed too hard. Then she set it down and began the ritual of dressing for work. The uniform hung on a plastic hanger behind the bathroom door. It had been white once. Now it bore the stains of 7 years of service, coffee and grease, and the accumulated filth of a life spent making other people comfortable while she starved. The drive to the Ashford Hotel took 15 minutes if traffic was merciful. The November rain continued its assault on her windshield as she pulled into the employee parking lot at 6:25. She had 5 minutes to get inside, to punch in, to become invisible. This was the skill she had perfected. Invisibility. The ability to move through a room and leave no impression, to serve and retreat, to exist without taking up space. But she was 2 minutes late clocking in. Not 2 actual minutes. 2 minutes according to Robert Hargrove's mood, which was worse than a clock. He was waiting in the supply closet when she pushed through the kitchen doors at 6:32 a.m. The supply closet was narrow, lined with stacks of white linens and cleaning chemicals that burned your throat if you breathed them in too deeply. It was his favorite place to corner her. He stood with his arms crossed. Robert Hargrove was a man who had learned that cruelty was a better management tool than fairness. 54 years old, with hair slicked back from his forehead using products that smelled like chemicals and entitlement, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light with the kind of gleam that only comes from material things purchased with money stolen from people like Aria. His suit jacket hung open over his barrel chest. The top 3 buttons of his dress shirt were undone, and dark hair curled at his neckline like something diseased. "You are 10 minutes late," he said. His voice was not loud. This was what made it worse. When Robert Hargrove was quiet, it meant he was certain of his power. That is coming out of your pay. Aria felt the words settle into her chest like stones thrown into still water. Mr. Hargrove, I clocked in at exactly 6:30. He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne and something underneath it, something sour. His breath touched her face. Are you calling me a liar? She had learned never to answer this question the way her instincts screamed at her to answer it. She had learned that words spoken out of anger came back as bruises, came back as lost shifts, came back as eviction notices stamped in red. No, sir, she whispered. Do you want to keep this job or not? His eyes were the color of wet concrete. They contained nothing. They promised nothing. They showed her, in that moment, exactly how little she mattered to him. I do, she said. He smiled. It was the worst thing he could have done. A smile meant he was certain. A smile meant the decision had already been made. Good girl. Now get back to work. And I will be keeping your tips from last night. Consider it a lateness fee. For your attitude. She had made $17 in tips the night before. $17 that she had counted on to buy bread for the week. But she nodded and turned and left the supply closet, moving back into the kitchen where the other employees pretended not to have heard anything. They had heard everything. But pretending was easier than witnessing. The rest of the day stretched into an endless corridor of small humiliations. She scrubbed the toilets in the rooms of guests who left them deliberately filthy, sometimes with their waste unflushed, sometimes with messages written on the mirror in what she hoped was ketchup but suspected was not. She made up beds in rooms where people had done violent things to each other. She could always tell. The sheets were twisted in certain ways. The pillows bore specific stains. She stripped it all and remade it, and then she moved to the next room and did it all again. Her orthopedic shoe squeaked against the marble floor in the hallway. The sound echoed in the emptiness. November rain streaked the windows of the corridors, and through the glass she could see the Chicago skyline gray and indifferent, a monument to people who had never had to count their $34 and wonder how long they could stretch it. Her back ached in the place where the scars ran deepest. She did not pull her uniform collar down to check them. She had stopped examining her own damage years ago. At 2:56 p.m., she clocked out of the Ashford Hotel and drove directly to the Rosewood Diner on Ashland Avenue. The Midnight Diner, everyone called it, though it had been called the Rosewood for 32 years and served breakfast to insomniacs and the people who worked when the rest of the world slept. She would work there until 2:53 in the morning. Then she would drive home. Then she would sleep for 4 hours. Then she would begin again. The diner smelled like it always did. Burnt coffee, grease from the flat-top grill, the ghost smell of eggs that had been cooked yesterday and the day before. The checkered black and white floor was sticky beneath her feet. The neon sign above the counter hummed with a sound like electricity trying to escape from its cage. She tied her apron around her waist and began to move. This was her world. This was all of her world. Hours passed. Shift work had a way of making hours dissolve into each other. She served coffee that no one really wanted. She brought checks to people who paid with coins they counted out one at a time. She smiled and did not mean it, and the smile was so convincing that almost no one could tell it was a lie. By midnight, her feet felt like they belonged to someone else. By 1:06 a.m., she could not remember what daylight looked like. By 2:02 a.m., when she untied her apron and counted her tips, she found $18. $18 for 7 hours of serving people who treated her like a part of the furniture. She drove to the parking lot where her car sat under the weight of November rain. The sky was the color of a bruise. The wind was picking up. She could feel the storm building somewhere behind the clouds, waiting for its moment to break open. She got in her car and turned the key. The engine did not catch. She turned it again. The starter made a grinding sound like something broken inside, something that had given up trying. She turned it a third time. The car shuddered and died. Rain hammered the windshield. She sat there with her hands on the wheel, feeling the weight of the broken car, the broken wallet, the broken life, all pressing down on her at once. For 8 years, she had not cried. Crying was a luxury she could not afford. Crying meant losing time. Crying meant her face would be red and swollen and people would ask questions she could not answer. But the rain was so loud, and the car was so cold, and the debt collector's letter was waiting at home on her nightstand, and somehow she could not hold it in any more. She dropped her forehead to the steering wheel and let the sobs come. They tore through her like something trying to escape from inside her chest. Her shoulders shook. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She wept for the $34. She wept for the car that would cost $2,000 to fix. She wept for her mother, who had died to give her medical debt as an inheritance. She wept for every shift she had worked and every bruise she had hidden and every time she had made herself smaller to survive. She did not see the black SUV pull into the parking lot. She did not see the man in the cashmere coat step out into the rain, his dark eyes studying her through the windshield with an intensity that suggested he was reading a book written in a language only he understood. She did not see the boy in the back seat of the SUV, a child no older than 6, pressing his small hand against the window to watch this woman weeping in a broken car. She did not see Matteo Calabrese, the man who had spent 3 months searching for the woman who had saved his son's life, finally understand why fate had been invisible for so long. Invisible people were harder to find. But once you found them, they were easier to save. The rain fell harder. The rain hammered against her windshield like it was trying to break through glass. Aria Winters sat motionless in her dead car on the empty highway outside Chicago, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had turned white. The clock on the dashboard read 2:16 a.m. Her phone battery blinked red at 2%. The debt collector's letter sat on her passenger seat, stamped in brutal red letters, final notice. $65,000. 2 weeks to pay or lose everything. She had $34 to her name. The sobs came without warning, tearing through her like something trying to escape. Her shoulders shook. Crying was a luxury she could not afford. Crying meant losing time. Crying meant her face would be red and swollen and questions would follow, questions she could not answer. But the rain was so loud, and the car was so cold, and the debt collector's letter was waiting at home on her nightstand, and somehow she could not hold it in any more. She wept for the $34. She wept for the car that would cost $2,000 to fix. She wept for her mother, who had died to give her medical debt as an inheritance. She wept for every shift she had worked and every bruise she had hidden and every time she had made herself smaller to survive. She did not see the black SUV pull into the parking lot. She did not see the man in the cashmere coat step out into the rain, his dark eyes studying her through the windshield with the intensity of someone reading a book written in a language only he understood. She did not see the small boy in the back seat, pressing his hand against the window. The tapping on her glass came like a gunshot in the silence. Aria's head snapped up. 4 men in expensive suits surrounded her car, moving with military precision. The one at her window was broad-shouldered and silent. She cracked the window open an inch. Rain spattered inside. A man's voice, surprisingly gentle, "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly. "I am fine. Just car trouble. I will call someone." He glanced at the empty highway, at the predatory darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights, then at her soaked apron and exhausted face. "How long have you been here?" "Maybe an hour." He made a decision that would tear apart the entire Chicago underworld. "Vinny, call Marco. Get her car to the shop. And you," he looked at Aria, "get in. We will take you home." She protested. "I cannot. I do not know you. I will be fine." A small voice erupted from inside the SUV, high and bright with recognition. "Papa, that is her. That is the lady." Aria's eyes widened. A child's face pressed against the back window, eyes huge and certain. She remembered him. 5 or 6 years old. The fire at the Continental Hotel. 3 months ago. August. The smoke. The heat. The scream that had changed everything. The man opened her car door. Rain poured in. His scar caught the light as he looked down at her. Get in, Aria. Please. She had not told him her name yet. Inside the black SUV, heat blasted from the vents. Aria sat rigid in the front passenger seat, her wet apron dripping onto the leather. Behind her, the child, Micah, kept staring at her with absolute certainty. The man driving introduced himself without turning his head, Matteo Calabrese. My son says you saved his life. Her voice came out shattered like glass. He is yours? I have been looking for you for 3 months. The hotel had no record. No incident report. You disappeared. She whispered the truth. I was told to forget it happened. That I would be fired if anyone knew I broke protocol. Silence filled the SUV like water. The man in the back, the one with calculating eyes, muttered something under his breath. Matteo cut him off with a single look. Then, softer, what is your name? Aria. Aria Winters. He repeated it like he was memorizing it. Where do you live? She gave an address in the worst part of Chicago. He did not react, just drove through the rain, his hand steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed forward. When they pulled up to her building, crumbling brick, broken windows, graffiti marking every surface, Aria reached for the door handle. Matteo's voice stopped her. The debt collector's letter. How much? She froze. How did you? How much, Aria? She whispered it. $65,000. In 2 weeks. It is impossible. I have $34. I work 16-hour days at the hotel and I still cannot. Her voice broke. She could not finish. Matteo was silent for a long moment. The rain drummed on the roof. Then, that debt is gone by morning. Aria's head snapped up. What? You saved my son's life. You risked your own life. You never asked for anything. You did not even tell anyone because you were afraid. He turned to face her fully, and his men in the back went absolutely still because they had never heard this tone from him before. His voice dropped to something dangerous. That debt is gone. Your rent is paid. Your car is fixed. And no one will threaten you again. Aria was shaking her head, tears streaming. Why would you help me? I am nobody. Matteo's expression softened in a way that made Vinnie and Theo exchange glances neither had seen in 15 years. You are not nobody. Not to me. Not to my son. Micah reached forward from the back seat, touched Aria's shoulder with his small hand. Thank you for saving me. Aria broke down crying. Next morning, Aria woke to notifications that made her hand shake. $65,000 deposited. Debt cleared. Her rent paid for 12 months. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone screen, unable to believe the numbers were real. That afternoon at the hotel, Robert Hargrove cornered her in the supply room. His fingers wrapped around her wrist hard enough to hurt. You look chipper today, Aria. Come into some money. His tone turned threatening. I saw you get out of a very expensive car last night. Black SUV. Nice friends you have. You better not be doing anything that reflects badly on this hotel. Because if you are, he leaned close, his breath hot against her face, I will make sure you never work anywhere in this city again. She pulled away, fear flooding back into her chest. But what she did not know was that outside the supply room, a man in a dark suit was listening to every word. Theo stood perfectly still, his phone recording, photographing every moment of it. 3 floors above, in the executive office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Victoria Ashford sat across from Robert Hargrove with a folder open on her lap. She was elegant, late 40s, her designer suit worth more than a month of Aria's wages. Her smile was sharp as a knife. Robert, we have a problem, she said. That little nobody waitress is getting too comfortable. I saw her arrive this morning looking almost happy. Hargrove smirked. I handled it. But Victoria. She opened the folder. I have been documenting her thefts for months. Fabricated receipts, planted evidence, witness statements from our people. She showed him the papers. $15,000 in stolen property. A perfect case for termination with cause. No severance. No unemployment benefits. When do we use it? Hargrove asked. Victoria smiled coldly. When the timing serves us. Maybe when we sell the hotel next month and need to clean house. A public scandal will bury any employee complaints. Hargrove raised his glass. To insurance. They clinked glasses while rain streaked the windows behind them. Outside the office door, Theo stood with his camera lowered, every word recorded, every page photographed. His phone buzzed. A text from Matteo, come back. We need to talk. The rain fell harder against the windows of the hotel, each drop a small percussion in the gathering darkness. Aria did not know that her life was about to change forever. She did not know that the men surrounding her had already begun to move. She did not know that by tomorrow morning, the entire Chicago underworld would be watching to see what Matteo Calabrese would do to the people who had hurt her. She only knew that for the first time in 8 years, she had hope. And sometimes hope is the most dangerous thing of all. The November rain hammered against the pavement as Aria Winters knelt on the cold Chicago sidewalk, a soaked apron clinging to her body like a second skin. Icy water pooled around her knees, seeping through her orthopedic shoes, the same shoes she had worn for 3 years, the soles worn down to nearly nothing. The neon hotel sign above flickered red and blue, casting harsh light on her trembling hands. She could hear traffic splashing past, people hurrying by without looking, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fog dissolving into the freezing air. This is it, she thought. 8 years of silence. 8 years of taking the hits, of enduring the threats, of keeping her mouth shut while Robert Hargrove pocketed her tips and bruised her into compliance. And it still was not enough. They still destroyed me. Her vision blurred with tears and rain. She looked at her empty hands, scarred and raw from years of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, carrying trays. Maybe Hargrove was right. Maybe she was nobody. Maybe she should just disappear, leave Chicago, fade into nothing. Her phone sat in her pocket, and she almost did not check it. But something made her look. An unknown number. A text in all capitals, stay exactly where you are. Do not move. We are coming. She lifted her eyes toward the street. Through the rain and darkness, she saw them approaching like ghosts made of metal and purpose. 3 black SUVs, their engines humming low and controlled, water spraying beneath their tires as they cut through the November night. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of her. A door opened before the engine finished quieting. Matteo Calabrese stepped into the rain without hesitation, without any regard for the expensive suit already darkening with water. He was tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the entire Chicago underworld. His dark hair, slightly silvered at the temples, was plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that stopped time. Storm gray. Penetrating. Burning with a fury she had never seen directed at her. He knelt beside her on the wet pavement, his hand reaching out to touch her chin, tilting her face toward his. His voice was low and controlled, but beneath it ran something like thunder. Who did this? Aria could not speak. Her entire body shook with cold and shock and something deeper, the breaking of a dam that had been holding back 8 years of pain. Vinnie appeared from the second SUV, moving with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. He draped a thick wool blanket around her shoulders, and she felt the residual warmth from the vehicle still clinging to the fabric. Theo helped her to her feet, his hand steady under her elbow. Matteo repeated, softer this time. Aria. Tell me who did this. She whispered. Hargrove. And Victoria Ashford. They said I stole $15,000. They have evidence, her voice cracked. They have fake evidence. They showed me receipts. Witness statements. They said they are filing a police report. They threw me out into the street and told me if I contact anyone, they will press charges. Matteo's expression went absolutely still. The kind of stillness that precedes something catastrophic. He turned to Vinnie without looking away from her face. Call Marcus at the FBI. Tell him it is time. Everything we have. Every single file. Theo was already moving toward the third SUV, phone pressed to his ear. Pulling up the Continental servers now. 8 years of transactions, every offshore account, every falsified record, we have it all documented. Matteo looked back at Aria. His voice was ice wrapped around a promise. This ends tonight. They placed her in the back of the lead SUV, wrapping her in blankets that smelled like leather and expensive cologne. As the vehicle pulled into traffic, she watched the Continental Hotel recede behind them, its lights blurring through Rain Street windows. She did not know that at this exact moment, federal agents were being briefed 15 miles away. She did not know that Marcus Chen, the FBI Corruption Task Force director, had been waiting for this call for 3 months. She did not know that Matteo had been documenting everything, every threat Hargrove made, every illegal deduction, every moment Victoria Ashford's fabricated evidence was being constructed. The penthouse was high above the city, all floor-to-ceiling windows and understated elegance. Not the ostentatious display she had imagined for a man like him, but something that whispered of power rather than screaming it. Micah ran from the kitchen the moment she stepped through the doors, his small body launching at her with the force of pure joy. His arms wrapped around her legs, and for the first time that night, something in her chest did not break. Something held. A doctor arrived within minutes, a woman with kind eyes who checked Aria for injuries, wrapped her wrists, gave her warm tea that tasted like honey and something she could not name. Aria sat bundled in blankets on a cream-colored sofa, watching Matteo move through the penthouse, speaking in low voices to Vinnie and Theo. His movements were economic, precise. Every gesture purposeful. At 4:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. A news alert. She opened it with shaking hands. Federal raid underway at Continental Hotel Chicago. Multiple arrests reported. The headline was already live. Matteo was watching her read it. He sat down beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His voice, when he spoke, was like stone. Robert Hargrove is being arrested right now. So is Victoria Ashford. The evidence against them is overwhelming. How? She asked. How do you know? How did you? I have been watching them, he said quietly. Since the moment you pulled Micah from that fire. I have had people documenting everything. Every threat, every falsified record, every decision Victoria made to destroy you. His jaw tightened. They thought they could hurt you without consequence. They were wrong. The screen flashed with a new image. A photograph of Robert Hargrove in handcuffs, his face white with shock, his mouth open in what looked like a scream. Behind him, federal agents moved with the precision of a choreographed operation. At the Continental Hotel, the raid was methodical. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear breached the front entrance at 4:41 a.m. sharp. Doors smashed open. Employees herded into the lobby, still in pajamas, confused and terrified. Robert Hargrove was dragged from his office on the executive floor, the office where he had orchestrated 8 years of theft and abuse. He was still in his bathrobe, his thinning hair sticking up at odd angles. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed at the agents. "This is harassment. I will have your badges. My lawyer will destroy you." An agent grabbed his arm, forcing him against the marble wall with practiced efficiency. "Robert Hargrove, you are under arrest for wage theft, embezzlement, tax evasion, racketeering, and human trafficking." The color drained from his face. Not the money charges. Not the tax evasion. The trafficking charge. What? No. That is insane, he gasped. That was not. We have 8 years of financial records, the agent continued, pulling his hands behind his back, tightening the handcuffs with a click that echoed through the lobby. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Falsified immigration documents for workers you threatened into silence. Shell companies. You are looking at 40 years federal prison, minimum. Hargrove's legs gave out completely. He collapsed into the agent's arms, trembling like a cornered animal. Please. Please, I can make a deal. I have information. I can? Too late for deals, the agent said. They dragged him toward the exit as news cameras erupted from every angle. Every channel would run this footage. Every news outlet in Chicago would have his face on their screens by sunrise, his name spoken with disgust by anchors across the nation. Across the city, at Victoria Ashford's penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood, the FBI arrived with equal precision. Her door was breached at 4:31 a.m. She stood in her kitchen in a silk robe, pale blue, expensive, holding a coffee cup that she dropped the moment she saw the federal badges. Victoria Ashford, an agent asked, though it was not really a question. I want my lawyer, she said immediately, her voice high and tight. But her hands trembled. The mask of sophistication was already cracking. The agent held up the warrant. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and accessory to human trafficking. That is absurd, Victoria snapped. I did not know anything about trafficking. That was Robert. He ran the operations. I am a legitimate businesswoman. I want my lawyer immediately. Your lawyer is already in custody, the agent said flatly. We arrested him an hour ago. His firm was laundering money for your hotel operation. Care to reconsider your story? Victoria's face went pale. Her hands reached out for the counter to steady herself. I did not know about any of that. That was his business. I only invested in the hotel. You signed off on every falsified employee contract, the agent continued, showing her printed emails on a tablet. You authorized every illegal payroll deduction. You ordered the fabrication of evidence against Aria Winters to cover up the wage theft. We have your emails, Ms. Ashford. Your signature. Your words. That was just, she was stealing. She never stole anything, the agent cut her off. And you knew it. You created false evidence to silence an employee who was about to report the wage theft to the authorities. That is conspiracy and witness tampering. Federal charges. They placed the handcuffs on her wrists with the same efficiency they had used with Hargrove. As they led her out of the penthouse, reporters with cameras and microphones swarmed the hallway. Her face appeared on every screen, every angle, her mouth open in shock and protest. Turn those cameras off, she screamed at them. You cannot do this to me. Do you know who I am? Do you know how many people I? Your assets are frozen, an agent said as he guided her toward the elevator. Your properties are seized pending federal proceedings. Everything you built, Ms. Ashford. Everything you accumulated. It is all gone. By 6 a.m., both faces were on every morning news broadcast. By noon, the story had spread to national outlets. By evening, it was international. 40-year federal sentences. Total financial devastation. The Continental Hotel was being seized by federal authorities. Every employee was being contacted about back pay, unpaid wages, stolen tips spanning 8 years. In the penthouse, Aria watched the news with Micah asleep against her shoulder. Matteo stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline as dawn broke gray and cold over the city. It is over, she whispered. He turned to look at her, and for just a moment, she saw something raw in his expression, something that looked like relief, like the release of a tension he had been holding for months. No, he said quietly. Now it begins. Weeks dissolved into months. The penthouse felt different now, quieter, lighter, as if the weight of vengeance had finally lifted. Aria sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, the glow casting shadows across her face at 11:06 p.m. An online business administration course played on the screen. Introduction to Financial Management. The irony was sharp. She was learning the language of money from a woman who had owned nothing just months ago. The apartment she found was small. One bedroom, high ceilings with water stains in the corner, radiator that clanked like a dyeing machine at 3 a.m. She paid $1,200 a month, a sum that would have been impossible a year ago. Now it felt manageable. Sustainable. She signed the lease with hands that did not shake. Vinnie had slipped her the first month's rent in an envelope. She had discovered it under her locker at the restaurant. She had returned it. He had left it on her car. She had confronted him in the parking lot at dawn. "I do not need your charity." Vinnie, broad-shouldered and scarred at the temple, had shrugged with the casual ease of a man accustomed to being refused. "It is not charity. Consider it debt repayment." "For what?" Her voice cut like a blade through the cold October air. "For saving the boss's son. That debt will never be fully repaid, Aria. Accept the rent. Accept the help. It costs us nothing and costs you everything to refuse it." He had walked away before she could argue. She had kept the money. Therapy happened on Thursdays at 2 p.m. in an office that smelled like vanilla and pine. Dr. Morrison was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that did not look away when Aria described the scars on her back, the way her shoulders tensed at sudden movements, the nightmares where Hargrove's hands were still there, still reaching. "Those scars are evidence," Dr. Morrison had said during week 3. "Not of weakness. Of survival." Aria had cried then, really cried, not the silent tears of someone too broken to make sound, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere below her ribs. Dr. Morrison had handed her tissues and said nothing, which was the kindest thing she could have done. The scars began to fade. Not physically, those would take years, maybe forever. But in her mind, they transformed. They were no longer a map of hell. They were a testament. She had survived 8 years of Robert Hargrove's cruelty. She had saved a child while covered in gasoline and burns. She had not broken. She was still standing. Meanwhile, Matteo watched from the shadows of his penthouse. Not in the way he had before, not with the intensity of a hunter tracking prey. This was different. This was a man learning to hold something precious without crushing it. Vinnie brought him updates every few days. She had enrolled in school. She had found an apartment. She had started therapy. She was working at Carmine's, a legitimate Italian restaurant on the north side where the manager was fair and the tips were honest. "She does not know we are paying her rent," Theo had mentioned once, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with Matteo. Matteo had not responded. He had simply watched the city lights reflect off the dark water of Lake Michigan and thought about a woman with nothing who had run into fire without hesitation. 6 months passed. The federal penitentiary in Theo received 2 new inmates, Robert Hargrove and Victoria Ashford. Each serving 40 years. The cameras had been merciless. The headlines even more so. Hargrove had aged a decade in a single night. His face, once flushed with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable, had collapsed inward. Ashford had screamed all the way to the transportation van. Aria had watched the evening news in her 1-bedroom apartment and felt nothing at all. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just the heavy, quiet knowledge that justice, when it finally arrives, often looks smaller than you imagined it would be. She had built a life. Not the life she had dreamed of, that life had been too small, a survival blueprint. This life was different. She had savings. An account with $6,000 that she had built by working doubles and eating only what she could afford. She had a therapist who saw her. A job where her manager, an older man named Giuseppe, asked her how she was doing and actually waited for the answer. She had not seen Matteo in 14 weeks. She counted them. The evening she saw Micah again, It was October, and the boy was waiting outside her apartment building with Vinnie. He wore a navy blazer and carried a backpack with a dinosaur on it. He was 7 years old and had somehow become taller since summer. When he saw her walking up the sidewalk with groceries in her arms, he ran. She dropped the bags on the concrete and caught him. "I missed you," he said into her shoulder, his voice small and certain. "Are you ever coming to visit?" Her heart clenched. A physical pain, sharp and sudden. "I did not think I was allowed." Vinnie stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "The boss wants to see you. If you are willing." The penthouse was exactly as she remembered it. The black and white marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath like a circuit board of light. But it felt different. It felt like coming home. Matteo stood by the windows overlooking Chicago at night. His back was to her. He wore a charcoal suit with the jacket unbuttoned, his white shirt open at the collar. His profile, when he finally turned, was sharp with tension. "You have been avoiding me," he said. "You have been avoiding me," she replied. He turned fully then, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the expanse of polished floor. His scar caught the light from the city below, that thin line running from his eye to his cheekbone like a secret written in flesh. "I wanted to give you time," he said quietly. "To heal. To become who you needed to be without me hovering like some," he searched for the word, a faint smile touching his mouth, "savior." Aria stepped closer. Her heels echoed against the marble. 1 step. 2. "I never needed a savior, Matteo. I needed someone to see me." He met her eyes. "I saw you from the first moment. That is the problem." She stopped walking when there was only a meter of space between them. "Why did you really help me?" Matteo was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. The city hummed beyond the glass. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. His chest rose and fell with careful breaths. "My father was murdered when I was 17, he said finally. "I watched from hiding. Could not save him. Built everything I have on vengeance. And then one night, a woman with nothing risked everything to save my son. You did not know who we were. You did not expect reward. You just acted." He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the precise shade of his eyes, dark like coffee, dark like the night sky over water. "You reminded me that courage is not about power. It is about doing what is right when you have everything to lose." "I was terrified," Aria whispered. "I know," he said. "That is what made it brave." She closed the distance between them. Her hand reached for his jaw, for that scar she had traced in her imagination 1,000 times. His hand rose to her waist, and when he kissed her, it was gentle. It was a question asked in the language of touch. It was every month of waiting translated into pressure and warmth. From the doorway, Micah cheered. Vinnie and Theo grinned from where they stood with drinks in their hands, witnessing something unprecedented. Matteo Calabrese, man built from ice and vengeance, kissing a woman like she was made of light. When they finally separated, Aria rested her forehead against his. "I have thought about you every day. I have been waiting every day," he replied. "Hoping you would choose to come back when you were ready. As my equal. Not as someone I saved. As someone I—" He did not finish the sentence with words. He kissed her again instead. Later, much later, when Micah was asleep upstairs and the penthouse was quiet except for the hum of the city, Matteo told her everything. The empire built on blood and vengeance. The rivals who had killed his father. The years climbing to power through calculated violence. The weight of 1,000 decisions that had cost lives. Aria listened without flinching. When he finished, she took his scarred hands in hers. "I am not afraid of your past," she said. "I am afraid you will think I am too broken for your future." Matteo looked at her, at the woman who had survived 8 years of cruelty and emerged unshattered, who had saved his son with nothing but courage, who stood before him with scars and strength written into every line of her body. "We are all broken," he said. The question is who we choose to rebuild with. She chose him. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.